Uh, खण्डन भवबन्धन जगवन्दन वन्दित माय निरञ्जन नररूप धर निरञ्जन नररूप धर निर्गुण गुणमय मोचन अघ दूषण जग भूषण चिद्घन आय ज्ञान जन विमल नयन ज्ञान जन विमल नयन वीक्षणे मोह जाय भाषर भाव सागर चिर उन्माद प्रेम पाहार भक्तर जन जुगल चरण भक्तर जन जुगल चरण तारन भव पार ऋम्भित जुग ईशार जगदीशार जोग सहाय निरधन समाहित मन निरधन समाहित मन निरखितव कृपा भञ्जनं दुःख गञ्जन करुणागान कर्मोक प्राणार्पण जगत तारण प्राणार्पण जगत तारण कृन्तन कलिड ত্যাগে সার হে নার বার ত্যাগে সার হে নার বার দেহ পদে নির্ভয় গাত সংশয় দৃঢ় নিশ্চয় মানস নিষ্কারণ ভকত শরণ নিষ্কারণ ভকত শরণ ত্যাজে যাতে কুল মান সম্পদ তব শ্রীপাদ ভব গোষ্পাদ বারে যাই প্রেমার পান সম দর্শন প্রেমার পান সম দর্শন জগ জান দুঃখ যায় সম্পদ তব শ্রীপাদ গোষ্পাদ বারে যথায় প্রেমার্পণ সমদর্শন প্রেমার্পণ সমদর্শন জগ জন দুঃখ যায় নমো নমো প্রভু বাক মনাতে তো নমো নমো প্রভু বাক মনাতে তো মন वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु बाक मनाते तो नमो नमो प्रभु बाक मनाते तो मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार दे दे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग दे दे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइছে छंद वकत बृंद आरती तोमार गाइছে छंद वकत बृंद आरती तोमार जय जय आरती तोमार हर हर आरती तोमार शिव शिव आरती तोमार खंडन भाव बंधन जग बंदन बंदे महाराज की जय। ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं तमचलो गुणाजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तां तेवां सकरुणां तव पादपद्मं मोहां कषां बहुकृतां न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारे गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तात्वं वक्त्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ते तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामो कृष्णे मार्तामृतां तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशां तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषां कुहकान्तकारे स्नान्तं शिवां शुभिमालं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि शक्ति भूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणे नमोस्तुते शरणागत दीनार्थ परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते जय 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 महामाई की जय जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. नमः श्री अतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरे सच्चित् सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. Right. So last time we had just given this first illustration of this doctrine, or more than a doctrine. I mean, I think it's a certain statement of an encapsulation of the contradictions that define our human existence. in as much as, last time we had illustrated this by one example, namely the desire to come completely in terms of knowledge with this world that we are in and ourselves, and the fact that this instrument, namely our intellect or mind or our senses, through which we try to know the world and ourselves, by nature they are limited. So we had illustrated this particular contradiction in our existence. That means being surrounded by everything and yet not being able to know with full clarity was one aspect of this contradictory state of things which defines our day-to-day existence, and which is one illustration of this word Maya that this particular lecture of Vivekananda is about. Next, from this seeking of knowledge, we go to another illustration, another example, which has to do with ethics. And he says, with every breath, every impulse of our heart asks us to be selfish. At the same time, there is some power beyond us which says that it is unselfishness alone which is good. So here in one sentence, he has summarized this ethical conflict with which we have to deal on a day-to-day basis. On the one hand, there is this interest in trying to preserve ourselves in its narrowest form, that is what is called selfishness. On the other extreme, there is this deeper urge to share in the concerns, in some larger concerns, which is what is called unselfishness. And our life oscillates between these two ethical antipodes. So the first one was in terms of knowledge seeking, curiosity, and the fact that we are not able to know all that we would like to. Here we come to a certain ethical conflict that conditions our day-to-day existence. The next illustration, again, from this lecture, next example, is between a certain attitude towards things. And basically, it's the antipodes of optimism and pessimism. That's what he illustrates now. Every child is a born optimist. He dreams golden dreams. In youth, he becomes still more optimistic. It is hard for a young man to believe that there is such a thing as death, such a thing as defeat or degradation. Old age comes and life is a mass of ruins. Dreams have vanished into the air, and the man becomes a pessimist. Thus we go from one extreme to another, buffeted by nature, without knowing where we are going. It reminds me of a celebrated song in the Lalita Vistara, the biography of Buddha. Buddha was born, says the book, as the savior of mankind, but he forgot himself in the luxuries of his palace. Some angels came and sang a song to rouse him, And the burden of the whole song is that we are floating down the river of life, which is continually changing with no stop and no rest. So are our lives, going on and on without knowing any rest. What are we to do? The man who has enough to eat and drink is an optimist, and he avoids all mention of misery, for it frightens him. Tell not to him of the sorrows and the sufferings of the world. Go to him and tell that it is all good. Yes, I am safe, says he. Look at me, I have a nice house to live in. I do not fear cold and hunger. Therefore, do not bring these horrible pictures before me. But on the other hand, there are others dying of cold and hunger. If you go and teach them that it is all good, they will not hear you. How can they wish others to be happy when they are miserable? Thus, we are oscillating between optimism and pessimism. Let me again summarize these three examples of this contradictory nature of our existence. One, the first point that he makes is the contradiction between knowledge and ignorance. The second, an ethical conflict between selfishness and unselfishness. Third, a contradiction in terms of attitude between optimism and pessimism. Where is this headed? Where is this discussion going towards? Let's read on a little more and then we'll come back. Yeah? And he comes to the sort of the denouement, the crucial point here, the final contradiction between life and death. Yeah? And he says, then there is the tremendous fact of death. The whole world is going towards death and everything dies. All our progress, our vanities, our reforms, our luxuries, our wealth, our knowledge have that one end, death. That is all that is certain. Cities come and go. Empires rise and fall. Planets break into pieces and crumble into dust to be blown about by the atmospheres of other planets. Thus it has been going on from time without beginning. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and sinners die. Kings die and beggars die. They're all going to death. And yet, this tremendous clinging on to life exists. Somehow we do not know why we cling to life. We cannot give it up. And this is the first time he says, and this is Maya. So again, these four pieces of contradiction between knowledge and ignorance, again, between selfishness and unselfishness, between optimism and pessimism, and now here, between life and death. Now, In the middle of all this, there has been a certain mention of a certain passage from the Lalita Vistara. This is more in the form of a story, but the crux of Buddhist philosophy, they have a very similar doctrine or a very similar idea where essentially they are saying the same thing but in somewhat different terms. And what they are saying is essentially the same as this particular idea about Maya here. What is it? They call it the interrelatedness of beings in one particular school, or the doctrine of dependent arising. Essentially what it means is that any particular kind of quality that is subjective, good, bad, optimism, pessimism, knowledge, ignorance, life, death, selfishness, unselfishness. Mark one particular thing about these things. They are all based on a subjective perception. Without a human being perceiving things in human terms, these qualities make no sense. In other words, so more generally, without a conscious perceiver, these different aspects make no sense. And what exactly is this idea about Maya, or equivalently, this interrelatedness, this dependent arising or interrelatedness of being? It is essentially the statement that any of these more or less basic subjective qualities with which we lead our lives comes simultaneously with its negation or with its opposite. And so, it's not possible, both from this Vedantic point of view or from this Buddhist philosophy point of view, it's not possible to catch hold of one to the exclusion of the other. You cannot have good without bad. You cannot have light without darkness. You cannot have knowledge without ignorance. You cannot have unselfishness without selfishness. You cannot have life without death. The only way, then, typically our natural attitude is hold on to that which is favorable, something which brings us some amount of happiness, but forgetting that its simultaneous shadow is the opposite of this particular quality. Which means that if we are, as a species, to handle our life maturely, then a stepping back is essential, and the understanding that these pairs of opposites are going to affect us because of the more fundamental reason that they define our existence as human beings. These dualities of a quality and its opposite, of opposite pairs, without them there is no existence. So, what is the way to handle this particular fact of life. The existence of these dual pairs is, in Vedanta, that's what is being called Maya here. And it's not some theoretical, abstruse, philosophical concept, as Vivekananda is insisting here. It's a statement of fact. It's extracted from our day-to-day experience. This moment we are feeling joyful, next moment we are not feeling so joyful anymore. Meaning what? Meaning that there is no possibility, it is not in the nature of things to be able to hold on to exactly one of these and exclude the other from our life experience. So what is the way out? And the way out, as it's going to be, this is where it's headed, is to take a step back and view these pairs of opposites as inevitable and accept them as the part of this cosmic game. So here he mentioned this Lalita Vistara, and I was trying to get to one of the Buddha's fundamental teachings. It's called the Pragya Paramita Sutta. Pragya means wisdom. So this acceptance of pairs of opposites, interdependence of beings, is what is being called wisdom here. What does it lead to? This is really at the foundation of, again, both these schools of thought. They are very closely related, the Vedantic school of thought and this Buddhist school of Shunya or Nirvana, yeah? Madhyamika school. From the Buddhist point of view, this is exactly what is lying at the foundation of what they call compassion, Maitri, Karuna, etc. From the Vedantic point of view, it is what leads to this doctrine, to this sentence in the Chandogya Upanishad, which says, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma, which means really, roughly, at our day-to-day practice level, the interrelatedness of all existence. It's not possible to exclude my phenomenal aspect of one's being from phenomena. That's almost a tautology. And therefore, the wise way to seek one's happiness is to find one's phenomenal being. I mean, so find the aspect of our being which is part of this phenomena as part and parcel of this larger existence of which we are a part, yeah? In which we are embedded. And to see it as that. So, the only way to avoid unhappiness or ignorance would be to step back from its opposite, namely happiness or knowledge also. Knowledge in our usual sense. So this particular thing, there is within this Pragya Paramita Sutta, there is one particular, at the core of it, there is something called this Hridaya Sutta, which has a cryptic statement, Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha, which literally translates to Gate Gate, meaning gone, gone. Paragate, it's gone, totally gone. Parasamgate, it's gone forever. And then Bodhi, that is wisdom, and Swaha. Yeah. Which means, essentially, what is it supposed to do? This is a cryptic statement, but it exemplifies this specific doctrine of Maya. If you want to get hold, I mean, basically succeed in avoiding sorrow, then one has to understand its mechanism. And the mechanism, essentially, the fact is that it brings along with it the avoidance of joy. So avoidance of sorrow and holding on to joy alone is not possible. That's what this is supposed to mean. It's a stepping back from all these pairs of opposites. In other words, viewing the experiences of our mind through enquiry and in this detached light. A stepping back, seeing whatever is happening in the mind by merely observing, by being aware, without getting drawn into either of these opposite streams. Why? Because joy and woe, selfishness, unselfishness, optimism, pessimism, all these ideas come naturally associated with their opposite. So this is one aspect of this, stepping back in order to understand. One aspect. What if we are in the midst of them? What happens when we are in the midst of various experiences in our world? The complementary thing, the complementary part of stepping back is acceptance of the world as it is with these dual pairs of opposites. Why? Because that's how, because of the interrelatedness of things. You cannot create a wave here without affecting things a million miles away. This particular thing, while it might sound like just a doctrine, today, above everything else, it is necessary. Why? Just a couple of days back, within the last 4 or 5 days, in Canada, it's pretty close to the Arctic, yeah? I mean, it's one of the countries which has a certain overlap with the Arctic Circle. It's supposed to be pretty cold, right? In Vancouver, which is one of the southern states, not of Canada, but still pretty far north. It's certainly above the 50-degree latitude line. There was a heat wave which reached something like 49 degrees Celsius or more. Now, where is all this coming from? Essentially, what we do here affects the atmosphere of the earth. What somebody else does in some other urban city also affects the atmosphere of the earth. And it's not that. So as a result, what happens? The atmosphere warms up, and something we do here has an effect in far-off Canada. Similarly, something happening in a more industrialized country affects rainforests. This idea that this single planet on which these 7+ billion members of this species, this Homo sapiens, we belong to, it's essentially the statement that every one of us is responsible for the lives of these 7+ billion minus oneself. So essentially, one is responsible also for one's own life. So each individual being responsible for the lives of others. This awareness today is not just some doctrine or theory or philosophy. It is essential if we are not to go down in history as the species that destroyed both ourselves and resulted in an extinction of life on this particular planet. It's had happened before. It's not that this is going to be a completely new thing. Most of the species had been eradicated at least twice in history. Not in documented history, but before that. So today, this is just one aspect of the interconnectedness of things, this awareness of global warming, this awareness that we are responsible for this one single planet on which all of us live, on which all these doctrines have emerged, on which all people, all emperors and saints and sinners and crooks, everybody we know has lived. This perception is a common sense perception. It's not something we have to stretch our imagination or go to philosophy books to understand. The world has become a lot smaller with this information technology revolution. It's being aware that the way one leads one's life here and now is going to affect, for good or bad, lives of others. It's this simple fact which is at the basis of this idea of interrelatedness of things, which brings with it this pair of opposites which condition our existence. We'll go on next time, but before I conclude, I'd like to, this particular aspect of the oneness of existence on this particular planet, I wish I could show you a certain picture, but I'll tell you what the story is. Somewhere in the early 90s, there was a Voyager space probe, Voyager 1 space probe, February 14th, 1990. It was leaving the solar system, and it took a picture of the Earth from a distance of 6 billion kilometers. This is a picture that has been taken from the farthest, that's the farthest picture that has been taken of the Earth on which all of us live. And the Earth appears on a full picture as less than a single pixel. And Carl Sagan, who wrote this book on the basis of this, called it the pale blue dot. This pale blue dot is really a picture of the Earth occupying less than a single pixel in a square picture. So imagine, at least, since I can't quite project this picture, at least imagine a big screen and then there is a single point, pale blue in color. Say a wall, and then there is a little dot there. That's how significant we are. And he writes in this foreword to his book, The Pale Blue Dot, look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. This is how the picture looks. Think of a screen where the sunlight is falling and a speck of dust. That's what the earth looks like from 6 billion kilometers away. And then he says, the earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of the dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the earth is where we make our stand. What is the perspective that is being brought in here? It's the perspective of an astronomer. Essentially, somebody who spends and focuses his attention on this vast firmament with its stars and galaxies in which we live. And so he brings this perspective in here. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Note that this is the scientific perspective today. A call essentially to the same thing that we've been talking about, namely the interrelatedness of existence on this earth and the responsibility as individuals, as members of a species, as a species itself, to regard this single planet which we inhabit as one integrated whole where it is not possible for us to seek for individual good or comfort or happiness without at the same time engaging with that of essentially the whole planet. This particular heat wave that occurred just this last week is proof that we, as a species, and our irresponsibilities can affect not just our individual lives, but the lives of others, including plants, animals, the planet itself. So, this doctrine of Maya, which we usually tend to think of as some kind of abstruse philosophical stuff with no real proof, this is how real it is. And put it in one of its aspects. I mean, I said there were these two aspects. One is to step back, but if you are involved, then you are engaged in this much larger reality. This greater awareness is what this is supposed to give us. We'll continue from here next time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.